Hi, welcome back to the channel. Over the past couple of weeks, there's been a growing sense that the war in Iran is effectively over, that the worst has passed, and everything is now returning to normal. But unfortunately, I don't actually think that's actually happening. In fact, when you look at the events of the last 48 hours, I think the evidence points in the opposite direction. We've seen another commercial vessel being attacked in one of the most strategically important waterways on the planet. The United States has carried out further military strikes. Iran says that it's retaliated. Shipping companies remain very nervous. Insurance premiums are still highly elevated. And perhaps most importantly of all, none of the fundamental issues that caused this conflict to start in the first place have actually been resolved. There may be a ceasefire, but a ceasefire is not the same thing as permanent peace. More importantly for all of us, even if the shooting stops tomorrow, the economic damage caused from the last 4 months hasn't actually fully appeared in any of the data yet. Inflation is only just beginning to reflect what's happened. Company earnings are only now starting to incorporate higher transport costs, higher insurance costs, and more expensive energy. GDP figures always lag a long way behind reality. So the global economy is now entering the phase where the economic consequences will really begin feeding through. And if this conflict does escalate again, the world won't simply face another geopolitical crisis, it could face a second economic shock before the first one has even finished working its way through the system. So in today's video, I want to explain why I think investors may be becoming a little bit too optimistic, why the risks remain significant, and what all of this could mean for inflation, growth, and financial markets over the next few months. Now, before we get into all the details, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? It really helps me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. Okay, so the first point that I'd like to make is that although people keep referring to peace, we don't actually have peace. What we have is a 60-day ceasefire. That is a pause in the fighting. It's not a comprehensive peace agreement. It does not resolve Iran's nuclear program. It doesn't remove the sanctions or answer the question of how international inspections will work or deal with the future relationship between Iran and the USA. And it certainly doesn't resolve the issue that matters most to the global economy, the safety of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait is one of the most important trade routes in the world. I think we've all become aware of that if we weren't aware of it 5 months ago. Around 20% of the world's seaborne oil exports pass through it every single day, or they should do. And a similar figure for liquefied natural gas, which is really important these days to Europe for providing electricity. So every single day, millions of barrels of oil leave the Gulf heading towards Europe and Asia. And if anything disrupts that flow, the consequences ripple through the entire global economy really quickly. Now, many investors assumed that once the ceasefire had been announced, shipping would simply return to normal levels. But that hasn't been happening. Over the last few days, a commercial vessel travelling near Oman was struck during its voyage. Thankfully, there were no fatalities. The incident caused damage to the vessel and immediately reignited concerns throughout the whole of the shipping industry. From the perspective of a ship owner, it doesn't matter whether the projectile was a missile, a drone, or some other form of attack. The important point is that the commercial ship was actually hit. Once that happens, the entire industry's assessment of risk changes. Shipping companies begin asking difficult questions. Is it safe to continue sailing through the strait? Will insurers continue to provide cover for me? Will crews agree to make the journey? Should we just wait? Should we reroute? Should we turn the vessel around? These aren't political decisions, they're commercial decisions by ship owners, and commercial decisions affect the global economy. Some vessels have repeatedly altered course or delayed their transit while operators reassess the situation. At the same time, marine insurers continue to treat the region as an active war zone. Insurance companies don't make decisions based on optimism, they make decisions based on probabilities. If missiles or drones continue to threaten commercial shipping, then the probability of claims remains elevated. That means premiums remain elevated, and those costs don't disappear. They simply get passed through the supply chain. Higher insurance, higher freight costs, higher transport costs, higher import prices eventually means higher inflation. That's exactly how geopolitical events work their way into the real life economy. The second development over the last couple of days is that military action has continued despite the ceasefire. Following the attack on the commercial vessel, the United States carried out further strikes against Iranian military infrastructure associated with missile systems, drone capabilities, and radar installations. Iran has subsequently announced that it has responded by striking US-linked targets. In other words, despite all the headlines suggesting the crisis is over, military exchanges are continuing. That obviously raises the question of whether this ceasefire will ultimately hold. Even if both sides genuinely want to avoid a full-scale war, incidents like these create enormous risks of escalation. One misunderstanding or miscalculation or attack causing significant casualties, and events can move quickly, really quickly. We've seen this pattern happen many times through history. A ceasefire reduces tensions, markets relax, investors become optimistic, then a single event changes everything overnight, which is why uncertainty remains so important. The third issue, and perhaps the most significant of all, is that Iran continues to argue that it has the right to control shipping movements through the Strait of Hormuz. There have also been discussions about requiring greater coordination from commercial vessels and suggesting that ships may need permission before entering certain waters. Whether those proposals are ultimately implemented almost becomes secondary. The fact that they're even being discussed creates more uncertainty, and uncertainty has a cost. Global trade depends upon predictability. Businesses need to know that ships will arrive on time. Manufacturers need to know raw materials will be delivered. Retailers need confidence that inventory will reach their warehouses. Energy companies need certainty that oil and gas can flow uninterrupted. When uncertainty increases, companies become more cautious, so investment slows, inventories increase, costs rise, economic growth weakens. Now, this brings us on to what's probably the biggest misconception currently circulating in the financial markets. Many investors appear to believe that because oil prices have eased from their recent highs, the economic impact has somehow disappeared. That simply isn't how economies work. Economics always operate with a delay. If you think about throwing a stone into a lake, the stone enters the water immediately, but the ripples continue spreading long afterwards. Exactly the same thing happens in an economy. The war has already created higher oil prices, higher gas prices, higher shipping costs, higher insurance costs, greater uncertainty, disrupted supply chains. Those costs don't instantly appear in inflation figures. Companies don't immediately increase their prices. Many businesses have long-term contracts. Some hedge their fuel costs months in advance. Others absorb higher costs temporarily because they don't want to lose out on selling their products. But eventually reality catches up. Businesses report lower profits, companies announce weaker earnings, consumers begin paying higher prices, inflation rises, economic growth slows, and that's exactly the stage we're now entering. We're already beginning to see inflation reflecting some of these higher costs. We're seeing companies warning investors that margins are under pressure. We're hearing increasing numbers of businesses talking about higher freight costs, rising logistic expenses, and more expensive energy. But we're still only seeing the beginning of the story. Remember that companies' accounts are reported after the event. GDP figures are historic. Inflation statistics tell us what happened last month, not what's happening today or next week. Much of the economic damage caused by the last 4 months simply hasn't appeared in the official data yet. So even if every single shot stopped tomorrow, even if a comprehensive peace agreement was signed, even if shipping returns completely to normal, the economic consequences will still feed through over the next few months. That's the first economic shock. The real concern is that we now may be facing the possibility of a second one, because if military action intensifies again, if more ships are attacked, if shipping through the Strait of Hormuz becomes more difficult again, if insurers raise their premiums further, if oil prices spike again, the world won't simply be dealing with the delayed consequences of the last 4 months. It will be adding another layer of economic damage before the first one has even finished feeding through. That's why I think markets may currently be underestimating the risks. Investors often look forward, and sometimes they look forward a little bit too enthusiastically. We've seen that many times throughout history. Markets celebrate before the underlying problems have actually been resolved. The headlines moved on, people assume the crisis is finished, then reality catches up. I'm certainly not suggesting that another major escalation is definitely going to happen. Hopefully, diplomacy will prevail and the ceasefire will strengthen and shipping will return to normal and the outstanding political issues can be resolved. But hope isn't an economic strategy. Businesses have to make decisions based on the risks that actually exist today. Shipping companies know that those risks are still there. So do insurance companies, energy markets, and I think investors would be wise to recognize that they haven't simply disappeared because the headlines have become quieter. So whilst many people now believe the Iran war story is over, I think the economic story is really only just beginning. The global economy hasn't yet fully absorbed the impact of everything that's already happened. And if this conflict does reignite over the next few weeks or months, those economic consequences could become significantly larger. And that's why I believe this remains one of the biggest risks facing the global economy for the rest of this year. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you did enjoy it, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much to everyone that supported me. If you bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you for that support. Really do appreciate it. It means so much to me. It's one of the reasons why I keep going. So thank you for that support. Without it, I'm not sure that I would keep going on some days. But yeah, I really do appreciate it.